to access my screen. What in the world? I've done this before. Okay. It says Zoom will not be able to record the contents of your screen until it is quit. So I guess I'll have to quit Zoom and then rejoin. I don't think that'll end the call.
It usually doesn't.
Okay. I'll be right back then. Professor Givens, you're going to be the new host.
Okay.
Okay. Hopefully this works now. Sorry about that. Is my screen up?
Yep.
All right, so this is my internship presentation. So week one, sort of came in, met some of the people in the office, general onboarding for like the first day. Cameron explained the game idea to us, which was a little bit confusing, but after some questions, we kind of figured it out. Should I explain the game now?
If you want to, go in a little bit of detail.
So it is sort of like Among Us, but once you die in Among Us, you kind of don't do anything, which is not fun. So the concept is there's a killer that kills one person, and then it transitions into the next act, where it then becomes sort of a detective game where you have to find clues, and then those clues sort of become cards that you can then play in the third act, which is sort of a card. We then were in Cameron's office, and he showed us kind of the Git cracking and all that stuff, and he allowed us to kind of pick what we were gonna do next. So I went with tile maps because I still didn't quite understand the game at this point, so I figured the tile maps I wouldn't really mess them up by not knowing the game if I'm just making the map. So I went with that. And then I kind of got that done and moved over to the act changer button, which is just sort of an on-screen button that you can click to send a message to the server that will change the act in the game state object. And I got a little bit of experience using JavaScript during that time, just by looking at the files and creating my act changer button based on stuff that already existed. What I sort of learned during this first week was how large groups of people, or even small, just groups of people in general, can kind of communicate with each other and all stay on track using stuff like GitLab and Monday.com to kind of give everyone different things to work on that won't conflict with each other. I learned about how real world development is done, where if you're working on a complicated project, you don't just make the super complicated thing. You kind of work your way into it by making something that can do a basic thing and then adding on to that step by step with like a development build. I got a little bit of experience with JavaScript. Xavier helped me out, one of the developers at the company, with getting the act changer to actually work. because he had some experience with sending packets back and forth. And then taking 5 with Cameron was little breaks out back. I got a lot of knowledge about the company and like how everything was working just by talking to him and some of the other people who go out back occasionally. And then the last thing from the first week was our meeting with John on game development patterns and kind of thinking about how we should structure the game and the files within that will allow for quick development, but also not spending a really long time on figuring out how to develop quickly. If that makes any sense, and kind of a trade-off between that. And then John actually gave us a book to read, which was really well written and not terrible. So I enjoyed that as well, and got a lot out of that. Week 2 was the first code refactor because when we first got there for the first week, we were working on a branch that was actually, I think it was 3 months old. If that's right, Cameron?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a couple months old. So then we were moving into the more current nightly code into a new working branch of code that kind of works similarly, but not exactly the same. So that was a new experience for me. And then once we got that done, I worked on my area detection and display code, which I'll point out once we do like kind of the gameplay demo. But basically, it just uses collision boxes, and then when the player walks into a room, it sends a message to a label that updates the UI so you can kind of know where you are in the game. Then I had my first big headache, which was the Y sort issue, which involved me spending quite a few hours looking into Godot forums and Reddit posts and all sorts of things, trying to figure out how exactly Godot uses Y sort. And what I've understood about it is that the Y sort is made for kind of basic games, but we were instancing nodes and then removing them and adding them on the fly, which didn't really work with the Y sort. But this also leads into one of a big learning moments because I told Cameron about this issue and some of the stuff I've come across, and with him coming in with a fresh perspective and working on Godot more than I have, he was able to pretty quickly figure out the solution to the answer, which was to add a little line of code at the top of every single node that needed to be Y sorted, and then it worked. And then the last thing I did in week 2 is I adapted code that we found for collision box merging, which basically when you have a tile map, you have a bunch of squares that represent a wall. So a bunch of squares in a row would represent that wall. And this code figured out where those squares were and then drew one collision box for it, which is much more efficient. And I took that code and then updated it for occlusion boxes, which was not as simple as I thought it would be because Godot, for some reason, has completely different ways of saying where occlusion boxes should be and what nodes need to have what in them to get the occlusions to work. So that was a good experience for me to learn how some of the nitty-gritty parts of Godot work. And so I learned how nodes can be instance included from the node structure, which was kind of the major part of the difference between the branch that we were working in the first week and the second week, which actually made it a lot cleaner, but it took me a minute to kind of figure out what was going on. To repeat myself, if you're stuck having someone else look at the issue can really pull you out of that situation, which is nice. Writing code modularly. At about this time, I think we were starting to see some merge conflicts between what me, Kong, and Ethan were doing, and Cameron told us that it's pretty important to only work on the part that you should be working on, and don't go fixing things in other people's areas, because then that's going to conflict with what they're doing. So yeah, how to adapt code, found that was for the Fusion merging, and then YouTube tutorials are not the solution. This was me trying to do like a mini map, and the way that the YouTube tutorial did it was very basic and would not work with the somewhat complex structure of our game build. So it was a long time of me working on how to fix that, and I ended up just scrapping it because it didn't seem to be important for main gameplay and getting like kind of proof of concept out. So, week 3, I updated my old area detection code to send signals to a handler, and this showed up later as being pretty useful because then I could kind of do anything I wanted to with those area detection signals. Like, for example, later on I made the kitchen floor in the map like slippery by putting code in the handler that would kind of reduce the acceleration time and slowdown time of the player. And little things like that made it really quick to add little fun things. We then started refactoring the old server code by putting the code into separate files, which I got a lot more JavaScript experience because I was actually creating whole files, and I got a lot of experience working with Kong and Ethan on this because we kind of tackled this together. And then I created a transition scene that got lost in the Git merges. It's somewhere in Git Kraken, way far down. But I got a little bit of making animation experience because I got to make little pixel art blood splatter animation, which is fun. So what I learned this week was not to put the universe in a chest, which was at some point somewhere unknowingly I accidentally put the entire map inside of chests. So whenever we would load the game, 4 maps would get loaded because we had 3 chests and a map. And this ended up taking a while to figure out because nobody was really checking chests for the entire map. So don't do that. We had our meeting with Jacob Timmy on the new server code, and I kind of got to understand how a more experienced programmer thinks about things and is able to create code that can be then used by less experienced programmers. So that was a pretty interesting experience. The importance of writing readable code. I think this has to do with Jacob Timmy's server code as well. It was pretty easy to understand once he explained it. I got some real JavaScript experience because we were actually kind of making things work on the server side. How to use animations in Godot, and then how to instance and remove nodes in Godot. Because at this point I was actually implementing things that required this. So the week 4, yes, so at this point we had really started using Jacob Timmy's new server code, and I thought maybe I'd be able to make a new server viewer. This turned out to be not possible for me to do, and took a long time because I had never used React or any of the other never had really used JavaScript either, so that did not happen. Then I watched Xavier write code in JavaScript to kind of get chests to open and close and kind of give us a example of how we should make things work with sending data between Godot and JavaScript, which I've learned a ton because I got to see Xavier debug things, run into problems, and how he approached fixing them. I then researched card game add-ons for Godot while this was happening to kind of find a thing to use for Act 3. I refactored the act change and reset game, which turned out to be an issue later, the reset game part specifically. And then I made a pixel art flex battle, or continued to work on that, I guess. I got some more familiarity with JavaScript and how it works and what things you should avoid doing, like calling things a variable, like var. How an experienced programmer approaches problem solving and debugging. How much software development is built on pre-existing code. This is kind of from using the Godot card add-on and looking at that and how much code goes into that and realizing how long it would take us to make an Act 3 if we were to just do it from scratch, and kind of how necessary that card add-on would be. The importance of the documentation of this code, because the original card engine we were going to use did not have very good documentation and didn't really work, and so that took a while to try and get to work, and then I eventually just looked for one with better documentation and found that, and it was much easier to work with. And I got an appreciation for how tedious making pixel art and animation is. So week 5, started off the week by adding the card add-on to the code base, which was pretty easy because it had very good documentation. It kind of had like a section for getting started. I then worked with Kong on getting items out of chests, and then added a changing act once conditions are met, which was useful for kind of seeing how to implement like conditions to change the act. Then I implemented this what floor area handler code, like I talked about earlier, using my
you can press
the area handler
button. It should
code that I wrote
lower
earlier.
the sensitivity.
That's not what it is,
Instancing
it's
doors
the
from the
lightness.
server,
The
which
sensitivity's fine.
really helped me to truly understand kind of how the game state was being stored and where all the information was coming from, and how to send it from JavaScript to Godot and vice versa. Locking and unlocking doors with Kong. There was a good amount of working with Kong this week, just on chests and doors, and then began the player interaction refactor. This came from trying to freeze the player and have a timer for when they interact with an object, so that they can't just like spam the open button and kind of break the chest. And I then realized that having the chests handle opening themselves doesn't really make sense for something like this. So I kind of met with Cameron and Jacob Kinney and kind of started working on having the player handle that stuff and having it sent to the server in a way that it makes much more sense. So I learned how to work with a partner. Programming, the way that we did this was Kong has a much better laptop than I do. It took about 7 or 8 minutes for my laptop to connect to the server viewer, which was not going to work. So we used Kong's laptop, and then I would kind of give him like direction or like my insights on the problem, and then he would kind of put it in. It's important to test implementation early before continuing on, like kind of test as you go.
Tilda?
Got some experience working with key value dictionaries for things like opening chests and
WSS?
getting the items out, and as well as
Star
doors. Yeah, how to interact between Godot and JavaScript, the client server.
Yeah.
And then the importance of spending time now to save more time in the future. This is about the player interaction refactor, because
It's not in the list.
we
It's
had
on the command list.
Yeah.
refactored the way that the player interactions were working, we would have had to write
I think connection
code
manager.
in every single
it's in
one
index.
of our
Index.
interactable objects to
This part's a
make
little
them
awkward.
work. So
Yeah, I was
we
gonna
added
write a
new
thing that
functionality
auto-loaded
that
everything
we
in the
can
command
interact,
thing,
then
and
you
I
have
just
to
never
add
got
a
around
bunch
to
of
it.
code
Yeah.
to that, rather than having it all in the player. There's just one player.
Windows is good.
So week 6, I finished the player interaction refactor, and with this it was much easier to freeze the player while interacting and have the timer for that be
Name is capitalized.
implemented. We then added portals for switching maps,
Other
which
require as well.
was
Oh,
not too hard, but there was some issues there with having to re-instance nodes for interactable objects
Oh, I need to reconnect.
after moving back, after teleporting back. I added more chests because I
That might not
had
work. You might
also
have to-
added more
yeah.
items. So I added more chests to be able to hold those items, and I got more experience working with the game state data and interacting between Godot and JavaScript. So I learned how to work with other people's code, because implementing the player freeze, I worked with Ilsa's code, who was another intern. Did some debugging with Ethan
Looks
on
like that
his
part didn't work.
say what app issues. The importance of flexibility. This is because I came into the office
I see the word test
expecting
on
to
the
do
server.
one thing, and
Yeah.
then John was there and
It's here.
basically said, no, we need to do
It's not
this,
there.
be ready for the presentation. So I got some experience with kind of switching up in the moment. And this shows the importance of being in person, because if I was not in person for this, it would have been
This part
very
looks- yeah, that
difficult
part's
to kind of get on the same page with everyone. I got a deeper understanding of how the game state is maintained on the server side with my reinstancing of doors and chests when the player teleports and then comes back. And then this is in bold for a good reason, because spent about 3 or 4 hours watching John code to get the server up. And it turns out
Reload
my
this.
reset game
It may have worked.
refactor from a few
It's
weeks
lost
ago
connection because the server restarted.
was the main issue. And if I had named the functions better and documented what I was doing, and
It probably worked.
I really should have revisited the
It'd be
reset
very
game
strange if it didn't.
code earlier on, now that I had an idea of what was happening in the server. We could have saved a lot of time and a lot of frustration on John's part. So I'm definitely not going to forget that, and that's a big learning experience for me. And then this was the current projects that we had, fully implementing player inventory. Me and Kong kind of flushed that out a little bit.
Why did it take so long?
Killing
for
an
that to
NPC
re-render?
once
I don't know,
requisite
but
items are
whatever.
obtained. In the
It was at
in the
least 6
build that
seconds before it
we will be
updated.
using
You're
later.
right, but yeah.
you will see that once you pick up a knife, then you can kill an old man NPC that I added. And then it was just merging and refactoring little bugs that appeared here and there when we were merging all of our branches together. And okay, so for my favorite part of the internship, I would have to say is the office culture and the banter and sometimes arguments about whether or not like a straw has a hole or if holes exist or all sorts of things. I really enjoy that it's an office that you don't have to take yourself too seriously, but everyone still respects each other. I really appreciate that. And my biggest takeaways from this internship is to code often and with people who are better than you. I kind of learned this from talking to various people out back. I was talking to Patrick, another one of the employees, and he was telling me about how he contributes to open source projects, and how that can really fast track your learning, because you're surrounded by people who know what they're talking about, and you have to write code that will be up to standards of those people. I learned to name things clearly and document my code, which
I did not update my name.
was from watching John try to understand what I did, and I didn't name things very well. Communication is important in groups. There was a couple times where it would be I would be working on something that also Kong was working on.
Have it return,
or he would be working on this, and I started working on it because we
updated
didn't
player name, and then
necessarily
you can
talk
give
to
it
each
a,
other about what
I
we
guess,
were doing.
kid.
And I definitely noticed how important that is to kind of make sure that, first of all, everyone.
I don't want to
nobody's,
check on every
like,
frame
doing
slash
work
every
that other
load
people
game
are
to do
doing,
the thing.
But also, even if you're not doing the same thing, if you're
Well,
working in the
load
same
games,
kind
that
of
should work.
part of the code, then merge conflicts happen. So that's why communication is very important. And don't put the universe in the chest.
I checked to see
that
if
would be a big error.
do I check to
that
see
you
if it
don't follow.
exists.
If CarePlayer.has name,
Yeah.
then you do the thing.
Load is called every single but that
I would
player
also
instance
like to
already
say
exists.
thank you to everybody in this call. Thank you to Dr. Gibbons for helping me out
good.
and
See player already loaded.
helping
Yeah.
me to get this internship and
There's COD player already
pointing me in the
loaded.
right direction.
You could put
And thank you to Cameron, Jacob, Timmy, John, if you're here. For just
line to both
everything,
you can
for,
put that in.
being
Yeah.
cool, having a good office like culture, and just for everything that you've done to help me out. So thank you.
It's great having you.
You can unmute.
That is the presentation.
I'm here. I just have a baby.
Okay.
Thanks, Dean. First of all, I really love that you
You-
guys had the students
Otherwise
read a
I'm
book. I think as professors, when we ask students to read a book, it's probably not going to happen, but I appreciate that. I also really love that you learned a lot. Probably my favorite thing that you said was that, you should take more time now in order to save time in the future. I think that's something as professors we really try to teach you guys, but you can't experience it until you're in something that's more real world.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. And there are some other things you said like that we really try to drill into you guys, but it's so hard when you're just doing class projects to really see that. So it looks like you got out of this experience the kind of things that we would want you to get out of that. So that's really exciting. I just have one question for you. I'm asking everyone this. What do you think is the most technically challenging thing that you did over the course of your internship?
Okay.
Unmute real quick. Hey Dean, can you show her, like, you open up your Git Kraken tree or something like that, so you could actually maybe?
I don't have Git Kraken.
Yeah, you don't have your tree. We could show maybe.
Sure. Answer.
Yeah, I can't do it. You'd have to.
I would say probably.
Yeah, you just share that screen on the
just
right.
communicating between Godot and JavaScript and sending packets of information back and forth and
Middle.
kind of
Give me a second.
parsing that data and parsing like dictionary key value pairs. I would say that whole bit was probably the most technically challenging.
Yeah, getting stuff to work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, well,
What would you like to do now?
thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I'm so excited for all that experience you got. It seems really great. So I guess I'll see you again a little after 4 or at 4.
Yes. What time should I be here for?
Unmute.
Well, this one went about 40 minutes, but it took us, what, 10, 15 minutes to start, and Kong's presentation is at 4, so I can't expect it being any later than 4:30, 4:45 at the most.
Dean, is it easier for you if we start the do the presentation of the game right at the beginning of Kong's?
It's no problem either way.
Okay, cool. All right.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks everyone. I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
Cool. Why'd you end the stream? OBS.
Okay.